So you're going to start right now?
I'm start.
Yeah, Sam, I give it like 3 or maybe 5 minutes.
I'm going to give it 2 minutes, and then I have like a 1-minute introduction, and then you can go, Sam.
Okay.
Oh, there we go, 14 participants.
So is everyone automatically muted when they join?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Looks like we don't have Melinda yet.
Okay. I hope I can edit the recording. Oh, there she is.
Okay, great.
Okay. Well, we're gonna get started now. People are gonna trickle in, and I'd ask that you try to stay on mute unless you have a question, just so we can eliminate as much background noise as we can. So, welcome to the UAVs for Conservation webinar. The idea for this webinar originated during a staff meeting at the Esri user conference this past July. A group of us who attended thought quarterly webinars would be a great way to connect our diverse GIS community at TNC. And the use of drones at TNC was a relevant and juicy topic that we're all interested in, and some of us are actively involved in or may soon become involved. We have 4 speakers today. Sam Kelly is our special guest from Duke University, and he's going to discuss case studies from the Duke Marine Conservation Ecology Lab's unmanned aerial facility. Then we have Steve Schill, a senior scientist from the Caribbean program. We have Tim Boucher, and he'll be discussing UAVs for assessing water quality, and he will update you with his latest title. And finally, we have Melinda Ching, a senior attorney from the WOA General Counsel team, and she's going to give us an overview of the legal and policy issues related to UAVs. And then at the end of each presentation, we're going to allow about 5 minutes for questions. If we don't have enough time for your question, we can follow up by email later on. You can either email me or the presenters. And then at the very end of the webinar, we'll have hopefully about 10 minutes for some open discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Sam to get started.
All right. Okay, I'll see if this works. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Kelly. I'm representing Duke University and the Marine Robotics and Remote Sensing Lab down at the Duke Marine Lab in North Carolina. Just to quickly go over why exactly I'm speaking to you and who I am. I'm a mechanical engineering student at Duke University, originally from New Zealand. My involvement with the Nature Conservancy was to generate a report about the use of UAVs within the Nature Conservancy's work over the past summer. I have an association with the lab I just talked about, formerly known as the Marine UAS Lab, but now rebranded for various reasons to the Mars Lab. Basically, we are located down at the Duke Marine Lab in Beaufort, North Carolina, and is directed by Dr. Dave Johnson, who is a marine mammals expert. We're primarily focused on using UAVs to monitor marine ecology, and we work with a variety of different entities, from governmental to private and NGOs. One of the things we're really proud of is the fact that we're one of the few entities that can actually work with the National Park Service and fly in national park lands, and we've done that recently. Down the bottom of the screen, you can actually see a flight log that we do. We're very careful about logging all the data all of the flight data that we have. So as you can see, we've flown over 210 hours in the past year, 667 flights on 9 different drones with 16 different cameras and in 22 locations. Perhaps what we're most proud of, though, is the fact that we've had 0 incidents and that's down to the fact that we're very careful about the drone protocols we have, and making sure that everything we do is well logged and well tracked. So what I'm really talking to you guys today about is how we can transform what were historically hobby toys into very powerful tools for conservation. And one of the things we've really found at the lab is that we have to plan a mission in reverse order, as in we have to think about what the end product is and the steps we need to get to that end product before we start thinking about the UAV we want to buy. So that is essentially what I'm going to go over just briefly, and the different steps to essentially making a good drone mission. So in terms of the kind of products we can produce down at the Marine Lab, these are some examples. The first being a change overlay. Essentially, we create a baseline. This one here, the baseline was a Google Earth image, and we can overlay our drone imagery over the top. This is a barrier island in North Carolina on the left of the screen, and you can see that it's eroded 200 meters in a very short amount of time, and that's very powerful, obviously, in showing that to policy experts. Secondly, in the middle, we have an NDVI map, which is a chlorophyll reflectance map taken with multispectral imagery. As you can see down the middle, there is essentially an invading red patch, and that is actually an invasive species, and you can track that invasive species invading the marshland over time. On the right, we have a thermal map. This is of an oyster bed, and essentially we can track the bacterial levels in these oysters based on the temperature. What was interesting about this is that we can also find water sources, because the water comes out at a different temperature. And with thermal imagery, we're also able to do population counts, obviously, if there is a temperature differential between the animals and the surrounding environment. In terms of more traditional uses, quantification is the obvious one. The far left, we have an example of a project we did with NOAA, essentially looking at how much marine debris was in this area left over from a clam farm that was abandoned 20 years ago, and that was used in a mitigation case to help construct a nearby bridge. In the middle, we have an example of a seal census we did up near Canada. Essentially, in one day, we could create an entire a map down to about 3 to 5 centimeter pixel resolution to count the seal colony very cheaply and very efficiently. On the right is actually the research that I'm doing more of, which is essentially using computer vision and other technologies in combination with these orthomosaics to create to identify foreign objects such as visual tags or marine debris. And the second type of product we can create are 3D point clouds. Essentially, we have a stream of photos that we can then triangulate and create these 3D models, which are good for quantification, how much stuff is above a certain level, and then also for visualization purposes. I'm not sure whether everyone is seeing this. We had some issues earlier on. Some of you might be able to see a visualization going on right now. So those are the end products. We've got to think about what software is needed to produce that end product. There are three main types, three main levels. The top type of software is actually Pix4D. You guys might have heard of it. Esri also has a software called Drone to Map, but that also uses the Pix4D software, and they both cost the same amount. They're reasonably expensive, but very, very capable of doing whatever you want to do in terms of your analysis. In the middle, we got Autodesk. A little bit less capabilities and a little bit less on the price point. And then actually you wanted to talk a little bit about Drone Mapper, which is an online platform where you can upload the images and then they will essentially put the orthomosaic together, which is orthomosaics, for those that don't know, is essentially a stitched together photo that you can overlay. And that is a much cheaper option and perhaps less upfront cost. So you got to think about what kind of imagery you want to send that software next. So I would like to perhaps go over some of the different sensors you can use. Now, in terms of RGB cameras, the top end are mirrorless cameras and DSLR cameras. They can get sub-centimeter pixel resolution, and then you can step back in quality a little bit for better ease of use and perhaps a little bit of price point, and look at perhaps the mid-range point and shoots or GoPros. Now there are two ways of doing multispectral sensors, and one is using an actual true multispectral Sequoia camera or something similar, where it shoots in different bands that you are then able to do multispectral analysis on. The second way you can do that, and I believe that Tim Boucher is going to speak on this later, is essentially you can use different overlays of different adapted point-and-shoot cameras, one that might shoot at near IR, the next one that shoots at red edge, and overlay them to create these multispectral analysis platforms. And then finally, you got thermal cameras. Thermal cameras are expensive but can be very useful in certain situations. And then finally, you got to think about the workflow of the mission. You got to think about what UAV you actually want to buy, and actually carry the sensors. So these are my personal recommendations after extensive research. There have been some new ones come out after my research. I think Tim or Steve might talk about that later. But essentially, if you got a cheap drone, I would stick to the DJIs. They have the most third-party capabilities in terms of apps and integration into the rest of the workflow. 3DR is also very good. However, they are scaling back their drone production. In terms of fixed wings, SenseFly is perhaps the best in this area. They are associated with Parrot, who have a cheaper option. These platforms can cost anywhere between $10,000 and $45,000. Now, you might wonder why the SenseFly EB RTK is more expensive, and the RTK unit is essentially a super accurate GPS unit that can dial in its real-time kinetics to get a GPS location to around about 2 centimeters accuracy. So that is very good for situations where you need to know exactly where you are, which is essentially very important for changing very small changes over time. So I just wanted to give you guys a brief overview of basically the workflow of creating a mission, how we go about creating a mission with drones down at our lab at the Marine Lab. I'm just going to let Tim and Steve go over. We're going to let Tim and Steve go over some of the more case study analysis, but this just gives you a broad overview of what we can do with drones. Feel free to contact me or the lab directly. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to shoot them my way now. Is anyone there?
Yep. Thanks.
Yeah, we're here, Sam.
Okay, perfect. Sorry. Is there any questions?
If you have a question, don't forget to unmute yourself.
Yep.
Well, if you think of one later,
Yeah.
you can email me and Carolyn, and I'll get your question to Sam, or his email address is right there.
Yeah, Sam, I got a question. This is Steve.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on local processing of the drone data versus using cloud services?
Yeah, that's a good example. A good question to ask. It is better if you can do it on site, especially if you can, if you want to be able to, analyze it on site and without an internet connection. Programs like Pix4D you can do on a laptop, and so the need to have an online server that is much more powerful is not really there. But if you are processing, a 5 square kilometer island that you saw for example, the SEAL sensors, that took 2 days to run on a very, very high-powered computer. Partly because there's a lot of things to stitch together. So it really depends on how big the mission is and your computing power.
Okay, thanks.
And then don't forget, if you're going to use a cloud service, you have to upload, could be many gigabytes of data, which could take time as well.
Yeah, and so I'd like to add that 3D Robotics, which is 3DR, which is one of the main brands for drones, has actually put out a new service called SiteScan, which does do cloud-based analysis of this kind of thing. It is pretty expensive for what it is, and it works in with the Autodesk software. It's very simple to use, I would say, but you have to think about storage. A lot of these are big files we're talking about, a lot of storage. So if you want to upload it, you got to think about that.
Yeah.
I know that was reasonably rushed, partly because it's a lot to fit into 10 minutes, but feel free to shoot me any questions you may have about that process.
Yep, and the report is available. We can make that available to everybody as well.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
All right.
Should I go ahead and take over?
Steve, yeah,
Yep,
why don't you
Steve,
go
you're
ahead?
next.
Okay. All right, has it advanced?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, well, I want to, this is great because it builds off of what Sam has just presented. We're in the Caribbean program, we're doing a lot of benthic surveys, but we're also doing wetland mapping, looking at mangroves, and all this work I'm doing with George Raber, who's a professor at University of Southern Miss, and he's been helping me on a number of trips, and I believe he's on the call, so he can help me field some of these questions. But I want to start off by why we got into this. And in the Caribbean, we do a lot of benthic mapping, looking at the distribution of reefs and seagrass, macroalgae, and in a lot of the work we use underwater video and we do surveys from a boat, but there are some areas that we couldn't get to because the areas were too shallow and we couldn't safely put the boat over there. So I got this crazy idea back in 2014. Let's build this a drone that can land on water. And one of my students who had a very keen knowledge of building drones and understanding how they work, he was able to build this one that you see here. That was our first one that we took to Haiti, and we're able to survey a lot of these shallow areas. And he built this on a budget of about $2,000 back in 2014. And since that time, I was hooked. And we've been using drones in combination with satellite imagery to be able to really map these different features, because you're really answering different questions at these different scales. We use satellite imagery to look at national scales and map out to 100 feet depth, 100-foot depth, where the distribution of these benthic habitats as we try to design marine protected areas. But at the protected area level, drones are a great tool to be able to monitor how these species are doing over time, especially in these shallow areas. And these reefs that you're seeing here, the Acropora palmata, they grow in these shallow areas, and it's an endangered species in the U.S. But we're starting to see comeback in certain areas, and so monitoring these with drones is a great tool for these protected area managers. So since that time, we've switched over to 3DR Solo, and this is one that we were using about a year ago, using two GoPro Hero 4s with lenses that have been changed so they're more mapping grade. One is natural color, and one is it produces an NDVI product. And these have been very useful, but they're limited in the fact that they provide you a JPEG product, and it's compressed, and it's 12 megapixels. So it's a nice cheap way to do this. But since that time, and I'm going to show you some of these products that we've produced. This is just using the GoPro camera, but then we've moved over to a new camera. Here's an example of some imagery that was collected. I think this is about 200 feet, looking at the Acropora palmata and the associated snorkel photo versus the drone photo. So we can clearly see species at this scale, which is, there are questions that protected area managers want at that scale. And then we were experimenting at different altitudes. At what altitude do we stop seeing these individual species occurrences? And based on our analysis in this one particular area, when you're flying above 200 feet, you start to lose the detection unless these occurrences are really large. And this was helpful to understand. And also, we've been experimenting with sun sensor angles and trying to understand what's the best time to get maximum water penetration. We're also monitoring mangroves, and this is an area at Tyrrell Bay, Carriacou, which is in Grenada, and there's a port that they're starting to expand into the marine protected area. So we're monitoring this site as part of a USAID project, and we want to see what impact this is going to have on the mangroves and the surrounding reefs. And so this is a great example of a local scale study area where we can fly this on a regular basis and get really high resolution imagery and do detection of environmental change. Okay, well, about a year ago we switched over to the Sony QX1 cameras, and this is a mirrorless camera, 20.4 megapixel. It shoots RAW, and you can actually have the camera converted. It weighs about half a pound, and we can put this on. That's what I like about the Solo 3DR is we can change the payload pretty easy, and it's very adaptable. It's a platform that you can use, depending on what your application is, and you can modify it, changing the sensors. And we used this recently down in it was back in March. We flew several study areas in Gabon in the Ba-Ougoué as part of a field support process to develop wetland maps for this Gabon's largest Ramsar site. And we used Pix4D to process the data. But with this package, when you're looking at multi-rotor versus fixed wing, we could fly about 10 hectares or about 25 acres per battery. And that is obviously can change depending on environmental conditions. But this is a map showing the areas that we collected the data, and it's a pretty large area. And we would take off from the back of the boat, and we would first we had two drones there. One would do the preliminary visualization of what type of wetlands existed, and then we had a wetland scientist, Allison Aldis, who was with us, who when we did the first exploration mission with the first drone, she could see what the drone was seeing with the real-time feed, because this canopy was really high and it wasn't really accessible, and so the drone was a great fit to first guide the boat to the area where we wanted to set up a transect, send the first drone out, do an exploratory mission, and find out what was there. And then from that information, then we planned flight lines for the next drone that we sent out. And then we launched it and caught it on the boat, and it worked really well. So these are some of the output products that we developed. We had a natural color camera where we collected the transect data, stitched it together using Pix4D, created a natural color as well as an infrared, and this is at a 3 centimeter resolution. This is the infrared. And that QX1 camera we had modified, and there's companies that will do that for you. We'll take off the IR filter and calibrate it and convert it to infrared. And then from that infrared, we can calculate the normalized difference vegetation index, which gives you an indication of biomass or how much active photosynthesizing is going on. It's the ratio between the red and the infrared. And then, as Sam was explaining, you can create these digital surface models from the photogrammetric methods that the software is using. And we found these are very useful for visualizing the wetland environment and also getting an idea of canopy structure. So that shows you a comparison. When we take the natural color, we drape it over the digital surface model. That's on top, and then we have the infrared product draped over the digital surface model as well.
Isn't that cool?
Now recently, this is a new product that came out that Parrot has just put out, $1,300. Now, our main roadblock here is the flight time. We want to get a bigger area. So here's an entry. It's not too expensive, but where George Raber is currently experimenting with this. He recently purchased one. And we're looking at putting in cameras because you get a 45-minute flight time and you can cover a much larger area, like 400 acres. You can cover with this solution. And the problem here is you need a location to be able to take off and land. And so that's one of the limitations. This wouldn't have worked in the area that we surveyed in Gabon because we were on a boat. But this is really exciting. Prices are going down, and these are adaptable.
Yeah, all the butterflies. Huh? All the butterflies outside in the trees. I don't.
Yeah, it sounds like someone's unmuted here.
Yep. Lauren, would you mind muting your phone? Thanks.
All right. So this is my last slide. This is kind of a matrix I put together showing some of the pros and cons of fixed wing versus multi-rotor, and some of the estimated costs. The fixed wing has longer flight times. You can cover more area, but it does require that larger area for landing. The multi-rotor, you can have vertical takeoff and landing, but they are developing fixed wings that have vertical takeoff, which it's just an exciting time. And that's one of the challenging thing is keeping up with all the technology, because just within a year it's changed a lot, and prices have really fluctuated. So then you're able to hover with the multi-rotor, which it all depends on your application that you're trying to accomplish here, your objective. It's matching up the proper system with your application. So. That's all I have. Looks like we got 5 minutes for questions. So does anyone have questions on what I've talked about?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hello? Oh,
Yeah,
can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, hey, Steve. This is Teresa Chapman from Colorado.
Hey, Teresa.
I think we actually may have met at a Digital Globe meeting a
Cool.
little while back. But I have a couple questions. First is, what sort of vertical, accuracy are you getting in those elevation models? So could you measure like the height of vegetation on a grassland?
Yeah, great question. I don't know. We've got George on the road, George Raber on the line, and he's actually done some tests on that. George, can you unmute and speak to that question?
Sure. Yeah, this is George. So it depends a lot on a few things. One of them is that if you didn't fly with like a RTK system that Sam talked about earlier, it would be necessary to have some ground control points using a survey grade GPS to get accuracies to measure the height of, you mentioned grass. And then I haven't really looked at measuring vegetation that low, but just trying to measure the ground surface with survey grade GPS, we were getting accuracies that were down into the 10 to 20 centimeter range, and so you probably could, but I don't know for sure how the grass would show up, as we were measuring the top surface versus the area around it. Anyway.
Can I quickly jump in on that? This is Sam.
Sure, Sam.
So certainly if you use an RTK system, which obviously costs a little bit more, but they're certainly coming down in price. We did a comparison with a laser line scan ground survey, and we didn't find any difference in the survey from an RTK system compared to a ground survey of a beach, which I presume would be similar in lacking of hills, etc. So I think if you used an RTK system, it would certainly be possible to do an accurate volumetric analysis or something like that.
Thank you so much.
And then if you didn't use an RTK system, your accuracies would be, does anyone know on the order of what it would be?
My experiment was without an RTK system.
Oh, okay. So that's the 10 to 20.
It was using points in the field. Survey ground control points. So I think you would have to either do one or the other. I don't think that you could get accuracies that you would want just from using the GPS from the sensor on the device if it wasn't an RTK system.
Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Hi, this is Teresa Menard in Hawaii.
Hey, Teresa.
Hi, I had a question about your flight planning software and your post-processing software. I see you use Tower and Pixel 4D. I'm new to this. Is there one type of software that can be used for both?
For the flight planning and the processing?
Yes.
I think the turnkey systems like the EB, I think they have everything in one. Is that right, Sam? Or are those two separate?
So generally, if you're talking about processing the data, that's usually just in Pix4D, which is a separate application of the flight planning. Usually the flight planning software comes with the drone as like a package. You get EB's software, SenseFly software, with the EB, and that will have various flight planning options within that mission.
And do you know if ESRI's drone to map does that have both flight planning and post-processing as part of its functions?
No, that's post-processing software. It's the same as like Pix4D, and in fact, it's using the same code.
Yeah, so generally they're separate. You plan the flight lines out, and then execute the mission, and then take the data, and then post-process it with a different software. So generally they are separate.
Right. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Not that they can't be created by the same company. There are software vendors that provide both, but like Sam said, usually the flight planning software is the drone or associated with the drone, whereas the processing software is independent.
And quite often the flight planning is a pretty small little program that can run off a low-powered laptop that you want to use in the field versus something super high-powered that you want back in your lab that does the processing.
Yeah. Yeah, so you typically run the flight off a tablet and the processing on a beefy desktop if you got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Tim, you want to take over?
Yeah, hello everyone. Tim Boucher. Let me just change slides here. I'm going to be talking about a project that started and actually completed a couple of years ago. So what I'm presenting, embarrassingly, is already sort of out of date. But the lessons learned, I think, are applicable. So this project, we initially wanted to do something with drones in Kenya about 2 or 3 years ago. It was part of a funding that we got where we could investigate different things. Then, and this is part of the legal issues that anyone is going to have that will encounter, unless you are lucky, there's no implications. Then there was a terrorism attack in Kenya, and this occurred about a month before we were about to purchase, and the entire Kenya government decided to shut down all drones in Kenya. And there are legal implications about exporting drone technology to other countries from the US that you have to think about and so forth. So there's a lot to think about. So then we decided, okay, can we do this anywhere in the United States? And we had a lot to think about there as well. Proximity to airports, knowing that you're on safe ground, private lands, not flying over other people's lands. So there's a lot to think about before you even start your mission. So we contacted EB, this was a couple of years ago, and we actually convinced them that it was in their interest to lend us their EB and come out with us into the field and have some fun with us in the field. And they were only too happy to do that. They wanted to demonstrate their drone and their software. And so the first time we flew it, I'm going to scoot a little bit ahead and show you some of what we did. So we flew an area looking specifically, our specific project was to see if we could identify and analyze differences in turbidity in rivers and small streams. And so this was an area so we contacted the Maryland field office, and they found an area that was suitable, that wasn't too close to an airport. We had to phone the airport, make sure that they knew we were there. Got permission to fly under 400 feet, but over 100 feet, make sure that we didn't go into anybody's private land nearby. And so a lot to think about. The first time that we did fly was a little bit of a disaster. We did manage to get the data, so it was all there. But this was in the days before you could actually fly a multi-spec camera. And so we had to fly 2 cameras at once. I mean, not 2 cameras at once. We had to fly 1 camera first, the RGB one, and then the infrared one a few minutes later, and then not only match the imagery together, which was a problem in itself, but what we found was that the turbidity, we had to manually create some turbidity in the stream, and by the time we were flying the second camera, the turbidity had disappeared. So it's just a little bit of a problem in. So that sort of gets back to the first bullet point and the key issues that I want to talk about, and that's your choice of sensor. So a few years ago you had to you either had an RGB type camera and then a separate separate infrared camera. Nowadays, as Steve and Sam have told you about, you can get multi-spec cameras, and in fact, the latest one comes with a multi-spec and RGB all together. So that part of that problem was solved by just waiting a little while for technology to catch up to what we wanted. Rectification was also a major deal for us to deal with. Putting 2 images together, making sure we knew where we were on the land. So we had to actually devise our own system whereby we could accurately geo-rectify the images, and I'll show you what we did in a minute. We also had to think about things such as wind. flight height and resolution. And EB, before we flew with them, they were quoting, you can fly in 10 to 15 miles an hour, it's not a problem. But when we got there and the wind started picking up, it did become a real problem. So you are limited usually to morning flights where there's less wind, and things like that. So that you have to be really, really conscious about wind, which then affects flight height, which then affects resolution. The higher you fly, the lower your resolution. But the higher you fly, the more land the more acreage you can fly. So there's a balance you're going to have to think about. I've touched on a little bit about the legal issues. We had to get insurance. In fact, on the first flight, when we flew with the EB on the demonstration, no TNC employee was even allowed to touch the drone just in case something happened. We got a finger cut off or something, which was insane to think about, but these are the types of insurance things we had to think about. And then not only that, the final key issue that we had to think about was timing with field work. We were working with very, very patient Maryland field office people, and they had to, find the property, make sure people were told about it, and then come out with us. And, we even jumped into the stream to try and get some turbidity going. And so there's a lot to think about. When, in terms of rectification, we had to do a lot of our own ground control points. And so we were lucky enough to find that, you see the little, I can actually point, the little green blobs here, I've got them indicated. Those are actually light poles on the road, and we could identify those from a Maryland database. We also created our own GCP sort of point location thing where we got a piece of cardboard and painted a black and white square on it, and we could put that on the ground, and that was easily identifiable and locatable. You can see it over here with the drone. There's just this is just an overview of where we flew and the points that we took initially. This is a very thin stream that we wanted to survey, and this is an example of the stream. So here you can see an actual photo that one of us took, just holding the camera in our hand, and then that's the drone image on the right. And you can see, you can certainly see the vegetation. You can certainly see the water, but we found that this depth, only perhaps an inch or two of water, wasn't enough for us to inform us about anything about turbidity, unfortunately. So our second and third attempts, which I wasn't present on, we actually went ahead and Esaias, NatureNet fellow, he had some cash lying around, so he went and bought an EB, and we actually got one of the newer cameras which had green, red edge, and near infrared, and they flew it separately. And so, if I can still do points, so here's the area that we were primarily interested in, and you can see the different, just how it looks different in each image. And so the red edge looks a lot different. So there's the red, and the red edge is a lot more defined. That's the stream we jumped into, and to try and create some turbidity. And we're still analyzing that to see how it came out. But for us, one of the big problems was how quickly the stream actually dispersed our man-made turbidity. We wanted to initially try and time it with a big storm that perhaps would come through the area and create some turbidity, real natural turbidity, but that was almost impossible to try and time. Here you can see actual people in the stream. There's one of us there. There's another one, and so actually, trying to really create that turbidity and see if we could detect it. So these are just some of the lessons that we learned. Here's some, we were over an agricultural area. So here's just a little bit of eye candy for some other ideas that we might be thinking about. So this is near infrared and just normal RGB. So those are some of the lessons that we came away with. I think I've probably gone way under my time, so if anybody has any questions.
Hey, Tim.
Yeah.
This is Teresa again from Colorado. I have just a general question about that we've been discussing here in Colorado about spatial resolution versus band resolution, and you know, getting the near infrared with the drone certainly helps, but looking at like a more hyperspectral image, let's say from digital globe or something, and what the differences are in classifying different vegetation types, or how well is the drone imagery comparing, I guess, to the hyperspectral, in terms of what you can do in identifying, classifying, let's say, whether you want to classify your coral reefs or your vegetation classes or something like that.
So we didn't do any sort of traditional classification using imagery. Has anybody else done that? I know that some of the newer drone sensors, actually you can buy a hyperspectral sensor, but I've never tried to classify it. And, are you talking about a traditional classification, Teresa?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Steve or Sam, have you done anything like that?
We have not, but I've done classification with just multispectral, just looking at blue, green, red, infrared, just like you do with traditional, like the digital globe satellites. But hyperspectral, I have no idea what the price of those are, but I imagine they're very exponentially more expensive. Sam, do you know?
Right.
Yeah, hyperspectrals are very expensive. But it's pretty exciting what you could potentially do with them. I'd just say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to do species detection, hyperspectral is pretty much the only way. It obviously depends on what you're trying to map, but like I have someone who's trying to detect this plant in the desert, and it's just not going to happen with 4 bands. You need a lot more than that.
Right.
But
Right.
Teresa, I think it would be possible. But I think, I've gone from using Landsat down to digital globe, like the 1 meter and 50 centimeter stuff, and it's not so much there's a lot more to think about in terms of, and this is going into sort of general remote sensing. There's a lot more to think about in terms of just the quantity of data that you're dealing with. So you got like a couple of hundred megabytes to many gigabytes, and so. It's a real headache, and then you got things such as which way is the satellite or the sensor pointing at that time, where are the shadows, and so the headaches just get exponential. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say the question of using hyperspectral all depends on what your objective is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Hey Tim.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is Phil Toomey. 2 quick questions, and just wanted to see if you would be the right person to follow up with online if we can't answer them right now. But 2 quick questions. So one is I work in our kind of urban forestry group for a lot of our cities work, and was wondering, is there any application that might be possible for this to monitor the health of trees in a more urban setting, is one question. And the second question is, I was approached recently by a graduate student in New Jersey who was looking for some Nature Conservancy property to test the use of drones for tree planting, kind of dropping these seedlings in little pods that plop into the ground. Like a million questions about whether that's actually feasible and whatnot. So those are the two questions that I'm kind of wrestling with related to drones.
Right. So I think the answer to your first question is not can it be done, but the legal issues surrounding that. I
Right.
think
Okay.
I don't think there's probably a city in the US that would allow you to fly a drone in it. I mean, it's just seems just a legal
Okay.
just getting anybody to fly a drone in a city is almost impossible. But even when you consider the proximity to an airport, for instance, almost every little city now has an airport, and DC itself, where I am, there's a massive no-fly zone. So that's just not going to happen. I think you should. The second idea I think is, and I just read something this morning about it, about dropping seeds and stuff like that. I think there would be definite interest. I think it's finding the right chapter, and probably, I don't know whether you're interested in deciduous broadleaf or somewhere in the west or east coast. I don't know, and I think it would be finding the right chapter. And I think there'd be people that would be interested. Can't see why
Okay,
not.
I'll follow up with you offline.
Yeah. And I think then again, it's like, can you fly it without impinging on somebody else's property? Can you fly it not too close to an airport or a city? And it's just gets really complicated really quickly. But anyway, yeah.
There's a company called Drone Seed that does that. You might want to check them out.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
All right, any other questions? Otherwise, we'll start looking at the legal implications, which probably is the first thing you've got to think about before you do anything.
Right. Hi, everyone. This is Melinda Ching. I'm a senior attorney located in Honolulu, Hawaii, and I have been, working with different members of the science team and the technology team on drone issues for some time, and mostly out of this some of the issues that Sam, Steve, and Tim have already touched on. Before it leaves my mind, though, I did want to touch in response to that last question. Under the FAA regulations part 107, there is actually an operational guideline with regard to transporting property for compensation or hire, so that the reference to that, the seed dropping, as Tim mentioned, I think it sounds kind of crazy that the FAA would actually, have that allowed as written into their regulations. But as long as you meet a lot of the other different operational limitations associated with a mission with the drone, then theoretically, you can drop seeds into poles and plant trees. But that's something that of course comes part and parcel with the overall evaluation of what your mission is. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the legal issues associated, which the previous presenters have really already gone into and discussed in some detail. There we go. These are the kinds of questions you should be asking yourself when you're considering drone operations.
Melinda, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you have to take over as presenter. It's at the top in the center, and then we'll be able to see the slides. Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Yep, I got the next one.
Oh, it's just me. Sorry.
Oh. Is everybody else okay? If not, I'll take silence as being everything's okay, but otherwise, let me know if for some reason it's not working.
I see the first slide as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Teresa. Okay, so these are the kinds of questions that you need to consider when embarking upon a drone mission and planning it, as Sam has really talked about in quite some depth, which I think has been great. The first question is why. What is your conservation purpose for this? This is probably not an audience that I need to focus too much on that, but there are a lot of folks out there. I've received a lot of questions from different TNC staffers about wanting to fly a drone for a variety of reasons, and some with questionable conservation purposes. This is not to say that taking video for the purposes of marketing or monitoring or other kinds of things aren't conservation mission related, but it's just important that we always keep our eyes on that prize, which is the conservation purpose. The second question you should be asking yourself is, where are you anticipating flying this drone? Is it going to be wholly on TNC property? Are you going to be possibly encroaching into a partner's property, state, federal lands? Are there any nearby houses, airports, power lines, things that Tim has already alluded to? So you have to consider sort of the nature of, you know, what you're intending to do in the location of where this is. You know, who is going to fly the drone? Is it going to be TNC staff? Do you have a partner? Is it a partner, a federal partner, a state partner? Is it a volunteer? You should identify who that person might be, because the evaluation as to what you need in order to make that happen is going to be slightly different. You also need to identify what you're going to be flying, what size is it, who owns it, and you know, whether it is going to fall under the FAA Part 107 definition of a small unmanned aircraft, which would be something under 55 pounds, or whether it would exceed that amount. And then what kind of flying do you need to achieve your result? How high, you know, how far, during what times of day, duration, and those are and that sort of thing. And that goes back to Sam's discussion about you know, planning your drone mission. The reason why I highlight these, you know, 5 different questions is to ask yourself, because they will have legal implications or legal or potential ramifications, you know, with how you design your flight. Okay. So these are some of the questions. These are some of the answers that we need to address. I should have started out with this, but, you know, small unmanned aircraft or drones. Okay, now I'm getting the not shared button. Hold on. Share now. Okay, there we go. Sorry. Are regulated by the Federal Aviation Administration. These are, you know, drones, you know, no matter how big or small, are considered to be governed by FAA part, and the small unmanned aircraft rules are codified in Part 107, which is the FAA rules. When you are thinking about making sure that your drone mission is compliant with FAA guidelines, you know, again, make sure you document, answer the question why. Make sure you document what your purpose is going to be and what you intend to be collecting. And then secondly, if you're looking at when you look at where you're going to be flying your drone, you may need to get permission from neighboring landowners by a license agreement, and please know that this should be in writing and not just, hey, is it cool if I fly my drone over your property? And the guy says, yeah, sure, no problem. You really should be getting it in writing. Likewise, if someone else is wanting to fly a drone over our property, we should as well be giving a license agreement, and it should be in writing. Make sure you, again, identify the surroundings. Part 107 of the FAA rules, you know, require you to stay away from airports, to have stay away from power lines, to make sure you don't operate your drone in a manner that's going to be hazardous to anyone or anything. Also, you know, we have had some people raise objections to the flight of our drones, even if, you know, you're away from power lines or you're away from an airport, where there's a possibility you can capture an image of a person or a personal activity. And I remember one time here in Hawaii, we sent a drone up in an area which was, you know, incredibly innocuous. But there, you know, here in Hawaii, people were laying on the beach, and they instantly got up and were making a big fuss about, you know, what are you taking pictures of, and what are you doing, and, you know, let me see what you took pictures of, and delete them immediately, and that sort of thing. And you don't want to get into a situation where you might be cited for some kind of invasion of privacy, real or perceived. You know, a lot of time it is just perceived, but you want to stay on the good side of your community and not be seen as running around taking pictures of people laying on beaches. You also need to decide who is going to be operating the drone, and this is something that is new with the FAA guidelines as of this August. You need to obtain a remote pilot airman certificate, and that will require that you register for a class and take a test at an FAA knowledge testing center near you. And the FAA is just now on its website getting those testing centers listed, and we have, I know anecdotally, of 2 people who are currently in that process. Don't yet know how that's all coming about. but how that's all going to wash out. But we do have a couple of people who are already in that process here at TNC that I know of, and I'm sure that there are many more out there. Please also, understand that when TNC is out there flying for conservation purposes, we can't default into the quote-unquote hobbyist, which is the least regulated, area of the commercial of the regulations. We are in fact a commercial use, even though we're not doing it to sell anything. We're doing it for our own conservation nonprofit mission. The use, the use that we have has been deemed to be commercial, and we've talked to attorneys about this, people who specialize in this kind of thing, and it would be inappropriate for us to fall into the hobbyist category. People have asked me, hey, I got a volunteer who wants to fly his own personal drone on our property. He says he's going to take a bunch of images, and it would be great because then he'll give them to us for free. Or partners as well will try, will try to do that. And we really can't be trying to default into that category because it's a less regulated category. Even the people who are our volunteers or partners need to comply. Also, small drones, just remember that the small drone is regulated by Part 107. If they're under 55 pounds, then it includes all the, the bells and whistles that, you guys like to attach to make sure you can capture the images that you want. Make sure that you keep it under that weight guideline. Also, we've been advised by your attorneys that it's better to use an off-the-shelf product because that's a product that's known by the FAA and has been, minimally approved. When we start doing too much, modifying on our own, we will at some point need to document those modifications to when we register our drones. So it's important that if you are doing some customization to something that's off the shelf, or even if you decide to build something from the ground up, that you understand that those kinds of modifications may need to be documented to the FAA. All of the drones that operate on our property should be registered with the FAA, and there is an online registration process that you can go through. It is just now, as of end of August, been opened up to commercial use. Previously, it was confined to the hobbyist, and now it's for commercial use, and so we'll need to make sure that all of our drones are registered. I also understand that there is an internal process going on to get everyone who has a drone to be registered on our Connect site, and I'll get to that in just a little bit. So, as Tim had discussed, how you're going to fly is probably one of the most critical things to understand, and the FAA rules are pretty specific. You need to make sure you maintain a visual line of sight. You need to be operating in the daylight or civil twilight. You need to have ground speed of no more than 100 miles per hour or no higher than 400 feet in the air. These are the kinds of things that are outlined in the FAA rules. And in a minute I'll show you, I'll refer you to the resource associated with that so you don't have to memorize them or take notes furiously. The most important thing is to understand this is so that you can fly a drone without having to obtain some other permit. There is a separate permitting process that you can go through if you want to deviate from these operational limitations. There's also newly established a waiver process. For instance, if for whatever reason it's important for you to do a night mission or some other kind of mission that will either take you out of the operational limitations associated with flying a drone without a permit. You can go through that process. Right now, the FAA hasn't really established what that process is, and so if you do want to do something that's sort of out of line with the limitations cited in Part 107, then let me know, and then we can start working through that and figure out how the FAA wants to do that. Be advised that that's not an easy. We don't know how easy or fast that process is going to be, so we're going to need a little bit of lead time for that. Federal. Also, I wanted to also mention that federal and state partners, and this is what I suspect, some of Sam's flying, is coming under, do issue do get certificates of authorization to operate drones for experimental or research purposes, and they will have usually will have greater latitude in distance and line of sight and those kinds of things. So if you are planning a mission that has more complicated sort of flight requirements, then again, please let us know, and we can help you try to navigate that process. Again, bearing in mind that that might take a little bit of time. What some of our programs have done is actually affiliated with agencies that have the certificates of authorization, and worked with them to sign MOUs or some other agreements that would allow us to take advantage of their COAs so that they can do a higher degree of variety in their flying. So I wanted to just end by giving you some resources. This is the UAVs for Conservation Connect page, which I think Steve had referred to earlier, is a good place for you guys to start if you're thinking about undertaking some drone operations or UAVs. I've also developed the legal team with in conjunction with other members of our drone team like Matt Merrifield, Trey Menard, and Gustavo Lozada, have developed some drone FAQs. Those are going to be updated. I've listed the link here to the current document, which gives you some general guidelines as to how to go forward. But we're going to be updating that to take into account new rules that were passed by FAA and came into effect at the end of August. The summary of the Small Unmanned Aircraft Rule Part 107 is probably your best resource as to what your operational limitations need to be, what you need to take into account. I've also attached a drone agreement template. This is a template of an agreement to use if you are allowing someone else to come in and fly on TNC property, a partner, some other organization that wants to fly a drone on TNC property. I would love to hear, whatever issues you have arising, and I would like to address them as best as possible in conjunction with the interdisciplinary team that we've established here at TNC to support drone operations. So, please feel free to email me or call me and, let me know if there's some legal issue, a perceived legal issue that you think you need to parse out. We have, internationally, I know some of you do work with the international programs. Internationally, we have also done some preliminary scoping on the issues associated with exporting drones to other countries. And Tim touched on, the sort of the aborted effort in Africa. We've had, by contrast, I know that, one of my colleagues, Brett Rawson, had a, drone in his luggage and carried it over to Mongolia, and they flew it and they had no problems on import-export issues. While I'm not sure I want you guys to just do that, it's definitely going to be a case-specific, country-specific analysis. So if you are needing that kind of analysis sooner rather than later, then let me know and we'll try to get some specific answers for you on that. The other issue that I want to touch on super briefly is that there are a number of consultants and contractors out there who do this stuff that takes all of the liability and the predominantly for me the liability away from TNC, and they are all listed actually in the FAA on commercial use of drones page, and that's pretty easy to get to. If you want me to help you navigate your way to that, just please let me know. So that's kind of my quick and dirty on some of the legal issues and some of the resources available in addressing some of the legal issues. Always feel free to call me, contact your attorney that supports your program, and they pretty much know to call me at any time to try to suss out what your issue is and to help you resolve it. So with that, are there any questions?
Melinda, this is Justin in San Antonio.
Hey, Justin.
Hey, I have two questions, and one of them had to do with a prior comment about insurance. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that the business units need to do as far as either checking with our insurer or getting the drone listed? I don't know if it's comparable, but like whenever we have a car or boat, there'll be insurance coverage for that. Do the chapters need to do anything for that?
Right. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Justin. The insurance issue, we're actually sort of keeping the whole drone issue in the eyes of our risk teams. And so at this point, it's my understanding that if we stay within these operational limitations where you don't need a separate kind of a permit, and these drones fall within this small category, each individual chapter does not need to get any additional insurance. That being said, everyone tries to push the envelope a little bit. So we will be circling back with our with Bruce Runnels and those guys to make sure there isn't anything we need to do on a TNC-wide basis. I know that Gustavo Lozada, who manages the UAVs for Conservation Connect page, is trying to get everyone to quote-unquote register their drone on TNC Connect so that we have a listing of which chapters have drones and what kinds they have so that we can address the issue of sort of the insurance and other operational issues accordingly. So I would say that that would probably be the first step, and our drone team is going to be investigating the insurance angle, because since this is now becoming so widespread amongst the chapters, we think that it's probably going to be wasteful, a waste of TNC resources to have each individual chapter pick up a separate rider or something for insurance, and we're just going to try to handle it globally.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Please feel free to call me or email me as you guys start to get your drone operations underway, and I'd be happy to, talk it through with you.
Can I just ask comment on one thing? This is Sam again. Flying within airport range. I don't know what TNC stance is going to be on that, but certainly where we do a lot of our operations, we're within 5 miles of a small airfield. And as long as we communicate with the airport manager and get permission and are on, are in communication, there is no issue with that. I just was wondering whether that'd be something that you'd like to comment on.
Yeah, sure. I think that our basic direction to all folks is to, for instance, here in Hawaii, you can't go very far before you're running into, an airfield. And if there is a designated, for instance, we have military installations. So if there's designated no-fly zones, you definitely have to stay out of that area. With regard to managing interactions with an airport, we would certainly entertain that, yeah, for sure. But our first sort of salvo into the regulatory end is to try to stay outside of that, airspace limitation, if possible. And then anything after that is something that we'd have to handle and make sure we develop a protocol for, being in touch with the appropriate, airfield.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. No, thanks for the question.
And just to follow up as well, in my report, I talked about internationally, just if you're doing international stuff, quite often there's no legal infrastructure at all because this is such a new field. Is there any kind of recommendations you think you'd have for people in that situation where there's no legal infrastructure in the country?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've done a quick survey and a couple of, I support the Asia Pacific region, and I've done a quick survey, and you're right. There's no real limitation that is placed on that. We want to adopt a strategy, whereby the operations that we have in countries in non-U.S. countries are similar to the operational guidelines we have in country. Staying away from the airports, observing power lines, keeping line of sight, flying under 400 feet. Those kinds of things we want to remain consistent. So initially, that's going to be our stance. Of course, if it's if the jurisdiction is unregulated, but the flight wants to create broader boundaries, if there's scientific justification for it and it can be operated safely, then we don't see that there are going to be any barriers to it. But again, we want to make sure that, it being an unregulated place doesn't mean that drone operations should, just kind of go crazy. And the other part too about the import export, especially if you're taking a drone and the import export regulations are not clear, it's important that you try to maintain as much of an off-the-shelf sort of drone equipment as you can. The big issue always is national security, the use of the drone for national security purposes or doing something that is going to be tantamount to spying or that kind of thing. So just be careful about how you MacGyver your drone.
Hey, Melinda, are there any changes? I know on the fact that we shouldn't make any images publicly available taken with a drone. That was a suggestion.
Yeah,
Is there anything that's changed on that?
I think that we definitely need to evaluate that. We need to make sure that images that I think we could walk that back actually. I think that we were unsure about how people would respond to the images taken by a drone where during a period of time, let's be honest, we were sort of flying in the gray zone of legality before the new FAA Part 107 rules came out. We weren't complying with the FAA requirements. For those of you who don't know, it used to be you actually need to have a pilot's license in order to fly one of these drones, and we knew that most of our folks did not. So I think we're going to be definitely, that's one of the things we need to do is loosen in the drone FAQs and the guidance is to loosen up that standard, because I think we are flying we can fly legally now, we can take photos. It's just important that any imagery that we capture, we have reviewed and made sure that we are not violating anyone's privacy, or that there are any discernible pictures of people and those kinds of things that might otherwise be a legal liability. But yeah, we're gonna address that and revise that again.
All right, thanks.
Cool, thanks.
Well, we're about a minute past time. I know a couple of the presenters said they may be able to stay a couple minutes late. So if anyone has any really pressing questions, we could do them now. I'd also, the link to the UAV page on Connect is up there. There's a news feed there, so we can continue a conversation there, and of course there's email. So just maybe 5 more minutes if anyone has something they want to bring up. Okay.
Great.
Well, thank you, Melinda and Sam and Steve and Tim. Those wonderful presentations. This session's recorded, and I'm going to post it on the UAV page and the GIS community so that it's available for anyone who may miss it or want to listen again. So we really thank you for your attendance. And if you have other ideas for GIS-related webinars, please be sure to let me know.
Thank you, Caroline. This was great.
Thanks,
Thank
Caroline.
you.
Yeah.
A lot of fun.
Thank you all very much. Have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.